Hello, Dr. Dana Thesone here with lecture number 1 for HFT6296. And you may be thinking of some questions, and maybe one of them is, why did you recommend a hospitality text to us? And the answer is because I have to. And another question might be, well, why didn't you recommend a business text? And the answer to that is I'm not allowed to. And then the other issue would be, are your lecture notes an outline, chapter outline for each chapter? And the answer is no. They follow the format of the chapter, but they distill an entire chapter into about between 5 and 10 pages of the information that you really need to know. So now what I'm going to do is just scroll through these lecture notes that you have read or will be able to read, or will read at some point in the future, and let me just talk you through those. In the first part of chapter 1, the author talked about the phases of strategic planning. And this mirrors the organizational life cycle. And it shows how the strategic planning process evolves over time. And you can just read through that, very straightforward. And what it does is it takes a look at an organization and it takes it through its beginning stages when things are really not strategic at all, ultimately to a fourth phase where the organization is really in strategic management mode. And then the author went on to talk about the benefits from strategic management and limitations of that. And then there's a discussion on globalization. As you know, technology is a key driving force for all societies. And because of this network technology, we now have a global society. We have started having one about 10 years ago, but now it's very prevalent. And organizations are commonly thinking, when they're thinking about growth, they're often thinking about global growth into other markets in other countries and continents. Pretty straightforward stuff there. And then I provide a discussion on learning organizations. The author really didn't provide this. These are some of my thoughts. Many of these chapter notes will include my own thoughts as well. And because of the reasons cited, before, people within organizations now rapidly assimilate information thanks to technology, and they alter their behavior, share knowledge, and modify cognitive processes. So to remain in synchronization with the dynamic and global external environment, the nature of organizations, or in order for organizations to learn from their experiences, learn from the past, learn from the present, they need to develop some form, and it doesn't have to be formalized, but some form of knowledge-based management. And these systems bring information that is converted to knowledge and then disseminated throughout the organization and to all the stakeholders of the organization. Knowledge is defined as using the cognitive ability to simulate situations which have been physically experienced through mental rehearsal. Interesting. Has something to do with your reflective process. Knowledge is defined as the process of using cognitive ability to simulate situations that have not been physically experienced through mental rehearsal. That's exactly what you're going to do with your practice of reflection. You're basically rehearsing for the future, and by doing what? By creating an awareness of your past and into the present. So what organizations are encouraged to do is to generate continuous process of knowledge accumulation, knowledge cognition, and knowledge transfer. The key person that presented this concept was a guy named Peter Sang, who was a pretty forward-thinking management thinker, leadership thinker, systems thinker. And so the information that it's the difference between an organization that is organic, considered to be organic, or considered to be mechanistic, which we'll talk about a little later. A basic model of strategic management is, it's very straightforward stuff, and it's presented, in the course. And I present it later on in this chapter. I put it into a picture for you, which is good. I like pictures. And what we, if you think about it, you have individuals, you have an organization, so you have individuals, and inside an organization, and the organization resides within an environment. And the environment consists of those factors that are outside of the organization, which the organization has no control over. And the organization itself has an internal environment which presents situations which the organization does have control over. And if you blend the external environment with the internal environment, then you create a strategic process that impacts each and every individual inside the organization. And then I went into a discussion. There's a discussion there about strategies, and they range from very broad strategies from corporate levels all the way down to business strategies at the strategic business unit level, SBUs. When you do your audits, you'll see the concept of SBUs pretty redundantly. And the next thing you say, well, why do you do all this strategic stuff? What is, being strategic? And being strategic really is thinking in terms. It's kind of like playing chess. It's planning for a rehearsed scenario that's going to happen in the future, and if it doesn't happen, then a contingent scenario will happen, and that's why we have contingency plans. And the whole purpose is for the organization to prosper in an environment and serve all of its stakeholders. Stakeholders are shareholders, people with an investment in the organization for some financial gain, customers, which we call guests in our industry, and the community, which is the micro area surrounding the organization, the area where the organization does business, and so, and obviously the people who make things happen, and those are the employees. So there are 4 stakeholder groups, and so the organization exists to satisfy the needs of these 4 groups, and if that's true, then the organization really exists for the purpose of engaging in relationships, and that's what makes an organization successful or not successful. Successful relationships will develop into a successful organization, and unsuccessful relationships will do the opposite. And then I go on to talk more about SBUs and how they impact things. And then there's a presentation of a model. It's a customer service relationship model. It's something I developed quite a long time ago. And if any of you have worked with me in the past, you probably have seen this before. And what it does is it's a grid. It's a 4-quadrant grid. And what it does is it identifies levels of intimacy and levels of duration. And it applies to guest services for clients, customers, and guests. And what it does is it takes a look at a couple of different professions and also looks at various sectors within our industry, our profession. And it shows that the most intimate and longest lasting relationships exist in certain sectors, and even in our industry, very low intimacy levels and very low levels of duration can exist also with customers or guests. For instance, fast food restaurants, quick service restaurants. Those are very low in terms of intimacy and very low in terms of duration. You go in, you place your order, you pick up your bag, and you go on your way. Then, just for example purposes, I give you a discussion about the Marriott organization, which I'm sure you've discussed in some of your classes, I guess. And I go on to talk about corporate direction, and here's a key model. It's another nice picture. And this model is, it tells you, here's the question. The question is, well, how can you do a strategic audit? I said this in a prior clip. How can you do a strategic audit if you don't know how to do a strategic plan? Well, this model shows you how to do a strategic plan. And it begins with an external scan, moves to an internal audit. So now you've gathered all your data from outside and inside, and now you compare that data to your mission, and you ask this question: does it still make sense to be in this business? If the answer is yes, then you proceed. A mission is really your purpose. It's why you exist, and it's what generates your philosophies, your corporate culture, and all of those things. And then you proceed to a forecast, which is a guess about the future, and from that forecast, you develop targets for performance. Those are called objectives. Targets for performance that last 3 to 5 years or longer, and it's a bad idea to do it any longer than 5 years, those are called long-term objectives. And for every long-term objective, for every target for performance, you have action steps to meet that objective, and those are called strategies. From your strategies, you develop in your organization policies, which are general guidelines for performance, and those policies generate the standards or the benchmarks for performance. And the same is also true for short-term objectives, which are 1 year or less, and short-term objectives generate tactics, which in turn generate procedures. When you establish all of that, then you implement, and then you continuously evaluate and revise the plan. So many of you, I'm sure, have been invited to participate in strategic planning teams, and that's the process that you did in one way or another. And I go into another example. I talk about a full-service luxury resort hotel, X number of guest rooms, and so on and so on. And I go into the structural function of it, and the purpose of it is to show the complexity of an operation, a hospitality operation at the property level. Now, as I said, and this is a good way for you to perceive it, it's another picture for you. What's the relationship of objectives and strategies? Objectives, you have objective 1, objective 2, objective 3, objective 4. Objective 1, strategy 1, strategy 2, strategy 3, strategy 4. And then from those strategies, you have policies, 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 policies. Those policies generate your benchmark for performance, which are standards, and the standards generate your procedures. A very tactical perspective of how things get done. Standards say what needs to get done, and procedures say how to do it. And then I go on to discuss various aspects of looking at the success in an organization. I talk about it from a financial perspective, a cultural perspective, and it identifies the different types of organizations. I think I already, in a previous clip, talked to you about the observation that some of you have already defined what your future will look like in terms of the type of organization you choose to work for. And that's really the notes for that particular chapter. It's an overview of everything we're going to discuss later on, but this chapter just differentiated strategic planning activities between most organizations and service organizations. There's a big difference between manufacturing organizations and service organizations, as we'll talk about further in the notes. And the one main difference is you can establish your strategy at a corporate headquarters, and you can push it through to the field in a manufacturing setting. You can't do that in a hospitality setting because the field, the SBU in the field, is so complex. So what has to happen is the corporate direction gets set in a hospitality organization, and then it gets utilized by the SBUs in the field, and the SBUs in the field develop the actual tactics that are implemented to make that corporate strategy happen. Because each, as I listed in those examples that I just told you about, a person at each property level, whether it be a theme park, an attraction, an entertainment venue, a resort, or a divisional unit of restaurants, each person at the head of those is really a chief operating officer. And that person, and the reason that person holds such a title is because that person has to implement and execute and evaluate very complex service structures, given the model that I already gave you. So as you scroll through these things, keep some of these thoughts in mind, and that really concludes the lecture notes for Chapter 1. And I think that's all I have to say.